So, one thing that is kind of starting to annoy me ever since the debut of Star Trek Discovery, and really before it, I mean, this goes back quite a ways, with Seth MacFarlane's The Orville. So many people are saying The Orville is traditional Star Trek, is the actual Star Trek of the day. Discovery is crap. And I'm not here to persuade anyone against their dislike of Star Trek Discovery if they hold that opinion. On the other hand, I thoroughly enjoyed the first two episodes. I was thoroughly riveted and engaged by them. I found them to be action packed and exciting. I found where people are saying there was a lack of characterization, wooden acting, I found the acting was superb, and I really was drawn to these characters, especially Michael Burnham, the sort of main focused upon character. And even though this is a prologue, this is, previous to her becoming a part of the crew of the USS Discovery and all this stuff. I'm not trying to persuade anyone against their dislike or distaste for that, dislike of and distaste for, if that is how they feel about it. But some people on the internet, being that this is the internet, make mountains out of molehills and have been banging on and on and on how this is not real, genuine Star Trek. One guy calls it a parody, and I think it's ironic that you have The Orville, which is an actual legitimate parody, much like, things we've seen before in Galaxy Quest and such like that. This is just the first, the tipping of the iceberg, if you will, of contradictions in people's arguments. Oh, Star Trek Discovery is doing things that we've already seen before, and that's a problem. But The Orville's doing things we've seen before, and that's not a problem. The Orville has some new things, and it's praised for that. Discovery, arguably, it sort of redesigns some of the starship aesthetics and the Klingon alien makeup and things. But where the Orville is praised for its new take on things and whatever like that, well, of course, Discovery is bashed and hammered home how much people have a distaste for it and whatever like that. And it's just the contrarian nature of the arguments that are bashing Discovery for its liberalistic, progressive, SJW crybaby agenda. That's the biggest term, SJW and crybaby, that I've run into time and time and time again. What are all these people that are complaining about doing? So many people are, leaving paragraph after paragraph in comments crybabying, for lack of a better term, over this show they despise, that they decided they despised before they ever saw the first couple of minutes of it. I mean, before they even necessarily saw the teaser trailers and previews and things like that. The leaked picture of the Klingons was enough for people to be like, no, this isn't my Star Trek. This is something they've said subsequently after every single new series debuted. TNG, to the original series Trekkies, was, abhorrent for a while. Until TNG finally found its legs, found its footing, and earned viewership. And we saw that the stories were so good and engrossing and everything like that. Similarly so with Deep Space Nine. And even to this day, Deep Space Nine is a more controversial series because it was a darker toned series. It actually surrounded war and, the Dominion War and everything like that. And so there are people even to this day who are like, well, that wasn't really Star Trek. It wasn't. And how do we define Star Trek? I've talked about the contrarian nature of this argument too. Voyager and Enterprise were synonymous with bashing for being too much Star Trek, too much of what we'd seen before. So what do you want? You want new things, or you want things that are familiar? Whenever they give you something familiar, you hate on it. Whenever they give you new things, you don't like it. Discovery's new, you don't like it. But it's even worse these days with things like the 2016 Ghostbusters and with Discovery and everything. I mean, I don't know what exactly it is in the socio-political climate, the SJW, either heavy right or heavy left, sort of agendas and commentaries and points of view that are just sort of really skewing the perspective on so many of these things. Star Trek has always been a liberalistic, progressive kind of framework where it was all inclusive. Everyone, every walk of life was accepted. Everyone was on equal footing. And, basically propelling ourselves forward, aspiring towards something greater, exploring the universe. These were all things that were encompassed in the human condition. But Star Trek was also always about an allegory through which, a prism through which we would put humanity and certain things that make up our world, in history and war and in intellect or lack thereof, and all these things, conflicts, would always put that under the microscope. I probably would have, if I were one of these CBS suits, I probably would have tried to work out the licensing problems that are going on therein, between CBS and Paramount and all that stuff, the ownership of Star Trek, and the definitions thereupon that suggest what Star Trek actually is, what it can look like, a lot of the reasoning behind the vast differences in style and aesthetics to Discovery is because of some of the legalese that's going on behind the scenes. They can't make things look one way, they have to make it look another way. They can say it's this, but it has to look like that, that kind of thing. There's a lot of conflict along those lines. So I would have tried to apply myself to get those things worked out. And then I probably would have tried to officially license and back monetarily the productions of Star Trek Continues, the fan production, as well as Star Trek Axanar, which, Axanar was really slammed upon because, let's be honest, the plot is basically Discovery in a sense. I mean, at least the timeline, an idea of conflict with the Klingons. Here's another reason though why that sort of bothers me. Why CBS put out those rules and those constrictions for fan productions and whatever like that. Obviously this was motivated because there would have been something conflictual with two different stories set at the same time, possibly dealing with similar characters, conflict with the Klingons, whatever like that, right? Obviously, they don't want attention coming away from their product and conflict with their own product. There's also a level of the cat who, was behind Axanar stocking up money and building like a filming studio that would be used for other things other than just what, the money was supposed to be for, strictly Axanar and whatever like that. There's a whole bunch of gray area there that I'm not even remotely familiar with necessarily. But that's the point. This was a conflict and needed to have the kibosh put on it. Understandably to a degree, but, I was wowed by the half an hour, whatever it was, preview coming ahead of Axanar. I thought it was really intriguing. I thought it looked really nice. It was kind of a mesh of TOS ship designs and the Abrams films. It was kind of a mesh of those things, stylistically, aesthetically, and people seem to really like it. But there are people who are complaining about the time and place, the plot of Discovery, where they were praising Axanar. Well, what's the difference exactly? Just because of how it looks? Unlike a Star Trek mentality. Crybabies, judgmental, I'm sorry, pricks out there, anti this, anti that, whatever, crybabying it up. And ironically, fanboys, fangirls are at least, to my estimation, they've become the utmost detrimental thing to their own fandom in more ways than one. Because everything nowadays sucks. Everything new sucks. Very rarely does anyone have any sort of universal acceptance of something new that's a new take on something old. And, we've gone through the history of film and things like that, and I've discussed in the past that, reboots and remakes are things that have been happening since the dawn of film. There was a silent film version of Wizard of Oz before the 1930s version. There have been 2 or 3 versions of the Maltese Falcon and all these classic movies. And Scarface, was a 1930s gangster flick before it was the more modern 80s Miami Cuban, Al Pacino flick. And sometimes the newer film or production is better than the old. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it sucks. Um, but I feel like so many people are contrarian and jump on the bandwagon with some of this stuff coming out this day and age. And it's irksome to me. The Orville is an enjoyable series, but it isn't Star Trek. It's Star Trek like, but it's a parody. They are, at least with the second episode, the first and third episodes were kind of wonky to me, and I discussed the third episode especially at length. It's a very controversial story that it was, dealing with, and I didn't really like how humanity was portrayed necessarily, unreserved, unchecked in their judgmental nature, which just goes that much further to suggest this is not Star Trek. There is no prime directive, a non-interference directive, a General Order 1, as there is in Star Trek. The human beings and the creatures in the show, there's no reservation. There's no calling things into question and sort of, being observant and trying to formulate an opinion. They immediately have a knee-jerk opinion already. And so the explorative nature of that is very unlike Star Trek because it's lacking entirely. And so for people to be like, oh, this is Star Trek. This is the Star Trek we want. No, it isn't. Because I guarantee you, if they had produced another series that was paced and acted similarly to Star Trek DS9, Voyager, TNG, Enterprise, whatever like that, you would have hated on it just as much. In most estimations, these contrarian, loudmouth types crybabying it up, blaming everyone else for crybabying, blaming the crybabies on creating Discovery to begin with, there would be unrest in the fandom even then. I think there isn't much they could do that would have pleased everybody. And that's just kind of my rant for the day. Does that make any sense? I don't know. I don't care. See you later.